Hello, everyone. This is Grandmaster Hans Zeman. In this chapter, we're going to be discussing one of the most important chapters, and that's after d4, the move d5. In terms of just looking at moves other than knight f6, leading to knight c3, d5, bishop f4. Other than this structure, d5 is d5 is going to be one of the most common moves you face, because a lot of the opponents who are going to be playing, the Slav, playing the Queen's Gambit accepted, playing, the Queen's Gambit declined, are all going to be going for d5. So after the move knight to c3, it's also important to consider how our opponents might react in this specific way, right? Because first of all, right, most natural move is going to be knight f6 and then bishop f4 and then we transpose. But the question is, well, what if that doesn't happen, right? So it's important to sort of evaluate here, again, how people can take us out of our repertoires where we feel comfortable. So here, there are a few ways, right? There's e6, which also can transpose as well. If, for example, knight f6, transposing knight b5. And even there's quite a few transpositions. Bishop b4, queen d6, knight f6 transposes to the position starting with knight f6, knight f6, knight c3, e6, bishop f4, bishop b4, queen d3, d5. So there are quite a few transpositions here. One of the main ways to avoid the transpositions is bishop to f5, going for this early bishop f5 break, and c5. This is a move that Duda played against me, and seems to be considered one of the best moves, but I'm going to show you why that is definitely not the case. So, I think we've seen that this is obviously transposition. C6 also sort of leads to a transposition, but C6 in combination with bishop f5 is also interesting. Here we're actually going to go for f3, knight f6, g4, here h4, and if you hear me say the word transposition another time, make it fresher. But after h6, e3, e6, we've actually transposed to another one of the main lines that we can reach from bishop to g4, right? So transpositions galore. So the move bishop f5, we can sort of say as a transposition. Knight f6, e3, transposes to the 3 c6 course. So as we go into more of these side chapters, you're going to see a lot of transpositions, which simply makes things simpler. So c5 and bishop f5 are going to be the key things to discuss first. Now, we're going to, again, go for e4, immediately breaking things open. And we played e4. This is not the first time we've seen this break, right? This is not the first time we've responded to c5 with e4, right? Knight f6, bishop f4, c5. Here we're playing e4. But this is actually simply an improved version. At this point, c takes d4 definitely isn't an option, because after queen d4, knight c6, first off, the pawn is hanging. Second off, you can even go bishop g5. So the only move really is pawn takes, and after d5, we're actually not going to be taking the pawn in this case like we were before, because after takes, we sort of want to be able to capture with the rook. For capturing with a knight is just a bit too passive, and obviously we don't want to capture the king and have the king stuck in the center. So we're actually going to push past, with the idea to recuperate this pawn later. So after knight f6, knight to e2, our opponents can play the move e6, challenging the center directly, and they can also go g6, just prioritizing development. e6 is the move that Duda played against me, and after knight f4, the funny thing is he actually played the move a6. And this isn't really a great move, and we're going to discuss that why. So basically the point is after a6, you can go bishop e3. And now you're sort of, taking on d5 just wouldn't make any sense because you've given me free tempo. So after, e5, again, this has never been played before from my knowledge, knight h5, things become extremely, extremely complex. And we're going to discuss this more in sort of the model game section for this specific game, because I think this game against Duda that I played, let's just discuss the game briefly. I actually played the move d takes e6. And the point was that after queen takes, king takes, pawn takes, I was play the move knight to a4. And this was actually, I completely misremembered here. And anyways, fascinating game. I really was happy with how I played. But anyways, the point is e takes d5 is just the most natural move by far. We played takes, and now we play queen takes. And again, we're sort of threatening some checks, threatening some other checks. So it's important to trade the queens off. And after takes, bishop d6, bishop b3. This is where things are actually, we're down a pawn. But the position is actually extremely difficult for black to play. And we're already sort of in only move territory. The only move here to even equalize or attempt to equalize is bishop f5, which isn't exactly easy to play. There's a lot of alternatives, like, knight c6. Sorry, knight c6 first. I made a mistake. Knight c6 castle, then bishop f5. The order doesn't actually matter because bishop f5 castles and then knight c6. So I just mixed the order. But anyways, knight c6 first. It's natural. And then here, you might be thinking, why not castling? Why not move the bishop? But it's actually a nasty threat of knight to f6. For example, if you castle, knight f6, pawn takes, rook takes, you're attacking both pawns. You've got the two bishops. Once this pawn falls, you have two bishops plus a shattered structure for black. Definitely think that's favorable for us. So it's sort of unclear like what they're going to do, and you actually have to just play bishop f5 to protect the e4 pawn. But this is where things get fun. We give the check anyways, forcing the king up, and then we give another check. And then we're like, is this a repetition? Is this all you've got, Hans? But after king e8, something has changed about this position, hasn't it? Castling isn't an option. So now we can actually, bring the bishop to c4, bring the bishop to b5, bring the rook to e1, and then, slowly recuperate the e4 pawn while the king is stuck in the center. Because if you play this immediately, then they could castle king side or queen side. So that sort of forces our opponents to go to f8 or to e8. Because if you go to e8, there's no point of going to e8 because you're going to have to end up moving to f8 anyways. And now we go h3, preparing g4 to play bishop to g2. And again, we have a huge lead in development. The king is terrible on f8. And, we're going to play rook h1. We've got knight c3 as a discovery, always attacking the bishop and then recuperating the e4 pawn. c5 is weak as well because the bishop always is putting pressure there. I'm happy here. The most interesting line is actually the best move is king e6, the only move to equalize. And, of course, the move is knight back to c3, right? Like we've got knight f6, knight d5, knight c3. It's like a roller coaster of where is this knight hopping, where is this knight jumping? Essentially the point is if the king goes back, now the knight's happy on c3 because it's attacking. You could even play g3, bishop g2. You can bring the bishop out. Again, this e4 pawn's extremely easy to recoup, especially with the king on the e file, right? Ready for the rook to start, starting some nasty discovery threats. So here you have to go knight e5 to prevent bishop c4 check. Now you go rook to e1, again, preparing to open things up. And I was really happy with what I found here. Bishop to g6 retreating, h4, threatening h5, f5, the only move, of course. Now we play f3. And we're saying, okay, take another pawn. Please be my guest. Take this pawn, take this other pawn. I will give you everything, but I'm going to give you a check. Your king's going to go back, and I'm going to go to d1. And, you might say, well, the queens are off the board. How can my king be in any serious danger? Well, then suggest to me how you're not going to lose a piece. Knight to b5, bishop to f4. I could go, can't go king c6 because of bishop d5. Can't go king c7 because of knight b5. Please tell me your plan of getting this king out of harm's way. H5, h6 is an idea. I might be down two pawns, but for lack of a better phrase, who cares, right? So this is how things can absolutely be blown open, right? Just again, sort of forcing our opponents to come forward. This sort of nuance, right? Provoking is really great. Another way for them to just protect the e4 pawn is play f6. Now we play knight f4. Again, king e7. They don't want to take, right? If you give up the bishops, then again, black's position is just so loose, right? And the pawn, like let's say takes, bishop b6. You can go, you can even go bishop b5. You can go bishop d3 to target the c5 one. You can go bishop d6. Again, you're up pawn, but like again, you can't castle. You got the open d file. You got the two bishops. White is definitely preferred, right? So king e7's normal. Then we go h4, right? And it's great because we're down a pawn temporarily, but the attack and the ideas are just so dynamic, right? Here, our opponents, let's say they play knight d5. Here again, we go f3, opening up things yet again. If you want to go pawn grabbing, I'm just gonna let you assume the worst here. Okay, bishop g2, rook comes to e1, everything's collapsing, everything's active. Terrible, right? Even let's see, try to play rook d8 here, then knight h5. And not only am I threatening, we are threatening the g7 pawn, bishop is threatening the g5, and still the development is really lacking. Now you can try to take the pawn, bishop g2, and okay, if you want to play f4 as your only move, knight takes f4, bishop g4, knight to d3, still, the king is still in the center, threatening maybe takes, check, threatening to take. Rook f8, only move, leaving the pawn astray. And then, of course, h5 being the best move, still leaving this pawn to be taken. I think it's quite clear that with the king in the center, black is just forced to make some ridiculous moves. Blunders can happen so easily. Everything is sort of barely held together for black, and white just really doesn't have any risk. A more solid way to play is, let's say, rook d8 first. You still have this knight h5 idea, and I love this variation so much because bishop g5 is an issue. Like if you ever try to go king f7, we're going to hit you with a check. Let's say you go h6, right? Trying to stop this. And then you go f4 thinking, oh, wow, I'm going to force this bishop back. This knight's going to be trapped. Oh, wait, rook takes d6. You want to recapture with the king. I'll take this. And I don't even need to take this pawn. I'll play here. I've got the two bishops. I've got this as a long-term weakness. e4 is weak. c5 is weak. I don't care about the rook. My two bishops and knight completely dominate your pieces. So, of course, the only move then, of course, is to play fe3, rook d8, knight d8, fe3, and then bishop g4, right? Say, oh, I'm down a pawn, but everything's okay. Because this knight on g7 is supposedly trapped. So after bishop c4, the next only move sequence is knight f7, rook f1, knight d6, rook f4, oh, of course, h5, bishop d5, oh, of course you're going rook h8 to play rook h7 to trap the knight, b4, bishop takes, and again, we get this ridiculous position after this entire sequence, and I'm just going to go to the end because again, I don't want to overwhelm some of you guys, but like this is the final position that we're going to get from such a ridiculous variation, and this just shows that when I go back, this entire concept, right? Like black has to defy all logic and all reasoning to be okay here, Like we put so much, just simply being down a pawn, but having their position in total shambles makes it really, really difficult for opponents to play. This entire sequence is simply ridiculous. So, I would just... okay, so also note bishop d4 isn't a good move here because knight e5, and you have nothing better but to repeat. It looks like you might have you might be winning the rook, but if you take the rook, right, you're going to take the bishop, and then the knight's just going to fall because it's trapped in the corner. So, this position I concluded, right, like this is just ridiculous. Just ridiculous for black. And I thought that just from a practical perspective, to have the king in the center like this with everything, all your pieces working together perfectly, I was like, I'm not a believer, right? I'm just simply not a believer. So, there's another move. Let's say bishop b6, supernatural move. Then we play knight c3. Bishop has to move back. Then we recapture the knight, recapture the pawn on e4. Then we're putting pressure on c5 immediately after. King is still in the center. So bishop b6 is a really quick mistake. We mentioned castles. We mentioned f5, mentioned bishop f5. So again, this is already putting our opponents under significant pressure, even if they continue this. And this is even considered like mainline theory. And all the lines that I showed you, all the ideas are complete novelties, never been analyzed before. And I just think that people see equal or see slight advantage, just think it's okay. But when I've taken this so deep and found all these interesting ideas, I've been able to find the hidden danger in a lot of these positions. So that's my job, and it's your job to just play chess, right? Simple. We got a good dynamic going here. So okay, back to let's go to c5, e4 takes, And the next move that we should consider after knight e2 is g6, right? It's a quite a normal move as well, right? You want to develop the bishop, but this allows us to recoup the pawn. And after castles, bishop e2, this is sort of the first segue. One interesting line I mentioned was bishop f8, knight g3, bishop c8. And, I would highly doubt that what if someone would play this, but it's like the computer's top suggestion. And it allows h4, and we get this really crazy position after knight d7, h5. And here the move knight to b6 is actually best. If you play knight f6, bishop f3, and you're actually just going to be castling kingside here, and you have quite a comfortable advantage. You can throw in h6 whenever you want. You have a nice space advantage or good control of the position, and this bishop on c8 just sort of wonders what it's doing. So knight b6 is actually the best move to sort of go e6 and immediately challenge things. And after d6, considering the fact that we reach this position after bishop, f5, knight g3, bishop c8, I didn't want to go down an entire, wrath of this analysis. But I think one really fascinating idea here to look at is, as they've drawn with arrows, is a4, rook a3, followed by bringing the rook over to h3 is actually the thematic attacking idea here. So this is just an example of how interesting things can get. But on a more realistic end, knight d7 is going to be played 99% of times. And after castles, now their options is knight f6. There's also b6. But the main point is that you have this strong central control, and you're always just going to have a slight advantage. For example, if knight f6, you take and play c3, you shut down the diagonal, and here there's not really much reason to continue. You can sort of just play. I drew quite a few arrows here, but again, you have a space advantage. The bishop is sort of unclear. These bishops are just not great, right? Because the diagonals, maybe b6, bishop b7, but then it's sort of stuck on the d5 pawn, which is not really going to be moving much. So you have a space advantage, you have a slight advantage. You play, rook e1, bishop h6, queen d2, just slow, normal developing chess. b6 is a little bit more critical because it's putting some direct pressure on the center. Here you go c4, and after knight f6, knight to c3. And here, this is, the best move for black here is actually to play e5, which is absolutely ridiculous. And this is the only way to equalize, or even, and let's just first look at how ridiculous the equalizing sequence is. So you play bishop g5, h6, bishop e3, knight e8, right? Pretty normal, bring on knight to d6, blockading. Here after queen d2, king h7, f4, knight d6, takes, bishop f4, rook e1, right? Rook e8, very natural, right? You want to recapture with a rook, bishop d3. And here, right, you might think, well, maybe black is probably a little bit worse, right? Because this structure is quite strong, and maybe the king can be a little bit weak. Of course, the only way to equalize here, by a long shot, is to play bishop f5, bishop takes f5, and knight takes f5 might be played by any human being, but actually g takes f5 completely equalizes. I would say that it's still dynamic equality. It's not like the game's over, we're gonna shake hands, but this you can just actually take with this, and who cares about doubling your pawns because this knight is just so strong. But this is one of the variations, right? If knight f5, then rook a1, and you still maintain some initiative, and the passed pawn is quite a strong pawn at that. So this is just a representation of how ridiculous it can be, right? But if you're a normal person, you play like bishop b7, now you go bishop g5, you complete a development. If you stop any e6, e5 idea, you're just going to have a space advantage in a very comfortable position. e6 immediately, we go bishop b7, bishop f3, sorry. In response to bishop, we go a4, really clamping down on the queen side. And after, c takes ed, cd, let's say they go try to, block with d6, we have them break a5. And the entire point behind a5 is that we want them to take to sort of weaken the c5 pawn, because that's sort of the core of the blockade, right? Like, let's say they take, then we can go bishop e3 and target the c5 pawn with, bishop e3, knight a4. And then this pawn, once the c pawn is taken and the blockade isn't as strong, this pawn will be even stronger. But after knight d6, we go a6, forcing the bishop back, and then bishop to f4. And all the pieces coordinate very well. The d5 pawn is strong. The a6 pawn can be a weakness, but it's also very difficult for black to deal with. You're going to go rook e1, queen d2. And it's unclear sort of how black is going to play, right? Because in the end games, this pawn could be extremely strong. And black is still also unclear, not really fully developed as well. The rook on a8 and bishop c8 are just not really doing much. So this is a possible path as well, right? Queen d7, a normal way. You just simply go queen b3, and then we're going to go h3, rook d1, bishop b3, and really just consolidate the d pawn. Once the d pawn is consolidated, we have central control, limiting our opponents a little bit passive, and then we have the a5 break as well in reserve to sort of weaken the black pawn structure as well. So throughout this position, if our opponents aren't going for this ridiculous e5 break, then we're going to be okay. But even here, there's another interesting idea, like with g5, things get ridiculously complex. But again, this is all sort of uncharted theoretical waters. After b4, there's this ridiculous race, and things become extremely complex. But again, I don't want to overwhelm you and overcomplicate things, but essentially you're going to be racing, right, to break through. And white still has a significant advantage here. It's just that things become extremely complex. But king h7 is by far the most logical move. But I think with the strong structure, you're bound to get an advantage regardless of sort of how things go. I think we discussed all the possibilities here as well. So in regards to the sort of the c5 move, with c5, e4 takes and d5, I think it's safe to sort of say that I've mentioned this theme of in my analysis of me sort of really finding holes in the current theoretical opinions or the theoretical consensus from top players throughout specific openings. And I would definitely say that this is another hole, right? Like if Duda is playing a6 here, which is definitely not really a great move, and he's not really too knowledgeable about it. Duda is someone who's quite a decent player, although I did crush him. I'll just throw that tidbit in to add to my humility. That's truly a representation of how much uncharted territory is, and how we can take them into the jungle. And I've reiterated that a few times, right? So other than c5, the other move that doesn't really lead to a significant amount of transpositions is bishop to f5. Now in this case, we're going to be playing f3, immediately going for the e4 break. Now here, knight f6. The point is g4, bishop g6, g5. And after knight h5, we're playing the move e4. And the funniest thing is I was playing until Tuesday. And after f4, like in the beta test, someone suggested, well, what happens if e6? And I didn't think to consider it because I was like, it's obvious that the piece is going to be lost after bishop e2, right? And after I added to the beta test, I go play until Tuesday, and someone plays e6, and I play bishop e2, and I'm like, oh, wait. I just won the piece. That's nice. So this is quite a popular or variation, right? Then I can also go back to g8, but this is where things get really interesting. And after e5, it's the only move actually to save the piece, and things get ridiculously complex. Like after fe5, our opponents have to play h6. Things just get extremely insane here from a theoretical perspective. For example, I think one of the really interesting is bishop a5. Bishop e2, c5, d5, queen a5, the only move, right? Sort of ignoring this piece by going for a direct counterplay. After rook b1, knight d7, takes. Again, all super forcing. So you see like all these pawns that black is collecting. You sacrifice like all these pawns. First of all, castles is the only move because the pawn is played. But let's just say queen takes d5. So let's, I'm trying to count, right? Like the queen took the c3 pawn, then took the c2 pawn, then took the b2 pawn, a2, and then d5. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. But actually, it's just totally lost because after rook d1, queen e6, rook d6. Here, you go queen h3, takes, and if 3 pawns against 7 pawns, I think you have 4 pawns. And for some reason, I always notice when I say one word like so many times because. It's the last time I should have this time, but actually we're gonna recoup this pawn. Every time I say pawn, I'm gonna have like nightmares. And the king actually doesn't have anywhere good to go. Like if there's ever castling queenside, f7 is gonna be super weak. So the pawns aren't really that quality. We have quite the quality pawns let's say like the castles, we're gonna castle play bishop g3, target f7, knight's gonna come in. Again, these pawns can't really be advanced if the castle queenside, because they're sort of shielding the king rather. So they're not really going to be, the rooks are going to have a nice time devouring those pawns. Another example is in this case after castles knight e2, then we take, then here we get knight to g3, knight takes e5, knight f5, and we're down 5 pawns here. But of course, queen e8 castles, and of course the only way to survive here is king g2, knight d4. Like if you do not trade this knight off immediately, you're going to be checkmated. And after knight d4, c4, rook d4, okay, things are from an objective perspective, it's equal, but I think playing with the piece is always easier, especially with the fact that the e4 pawn is likely to fall, right? Black doesn't have any winning chances here because with the piece, there's only so much that can really happen, and the pawns will sort of be collected slowly enough, but probably not enough to win. There's chances for both sides, which is how I would conclude it. But okay, this is another ridiculous variation that I found here. Okay, but for all serious purposes, like the most likely move is to play h6, right? Because you want to protect the pawn with the knight of the rook. Here we play queen to g4, preparing to take back with the bishop, and also hoping to castle as fast as possible. And now queen d7 is actually extremely critical, right? If a normal bishop b3 lands in huge trouble, bishop e3 takes knight g2. And again, we're down a pawn, but once this e4 pawn falls, you're sort of going to be asking yourself, and once you castle, again, white is just such a massive lead in development that black's position just really is not that great. So that's, let's say you go queen d7 and you're very precise. Then you trade the queens, you go takes, and here actually you cannot even take this pawn back because then you're basically lost. You actually have to play c5, of course, ignoring the pawn. After bishop e3, takes, finally taking the pawn, knight e2. Black should challenge the bishop by playing bishop c5. And after takes, castles. Knight e6 is extremely strong because it's preparing to bring the knight out. Again, this knight is just a very, very bad piece because it's just sort of stuck. After knight d8, knight d5, again, stopping the knight from coming out. The goal is to sort of keep this knight stuck. Rook d8, bishop h3, knight g5, bishop g4. This was sort of an interesting variation, right? And you might wonder, like, what if this, what if that? Again, this is sort of more of an illustration of the opening. And again, I think in video, especially, I can illustrate the themes and talk about things and verbalize them well. So I feel like it's just sort of more instructive. But yeah, this is just sort of to show how ridiculously precise. Like you make one mistake, you take on h6, suddenly knight g2, c5, bishop e2. And if you take this pawn, again, the king is totally in center and just stuck, right? And the extra pawn on e4 is going to do much. Let's say bishop e7, castles, takes here, rook g1. You're going to go rook f1 next. Again, the king is stuck with 2 open rooks and all the pieces, staring. Bishop f4 here, bishop is targeting here. Like everything is staring at that black king. And you might, the queen's not being on the board really just doesn't give black the safety net that they probably were hoping for. So this line is absolutely ridiculously tough for black to play. And this g5 idea is just with knight h5, it's, forcing e5, forcing h6, forcing queen d7, like this consecutive series of only moves is, forcing c5. Like this entire sequence really puts some serious practical pressure on our opponents. So we can also look to knight g8. Now we play h4, threatening, h5. After h6, we play e4. Again, immediately going to open things up. We have a great initiative. We've gained time. The knight on g8. This has gone backwards. The bishop on g6 is the only piece that's developed. After e6, trying to consolidate things. For example, like if you go takes, we have h5. The point is that it's sort of awkward of where you're going to go, because if you go here, we take with tempo. If you go here, there's also some g6 ideas, takes in here. It's like, again, a huge center position is in shambles. Very, very difficult for black to play. So you want to play e6, keep things solid. Now knight h3, of course. And the threat is knight to f4, so you have to take the pawn. And now we actually just take it with a bishop to provoke f6, to just go backwards. giving away the pawn to go queen e2. And now we're, again, sacrificing a pawn in this variation. However, we're going to castle. We have a huge lead development. We're going to play bishop g2 next. Knight f4 is coming. King is still in the center. We get huge pressure. We're almost fully developed. And, the only pieces that have moved this game are the bishop and rook, right? And those pieces are targets more than active pieces that are going to be contributing to the game. So in this entire specific variation within bishop f5, we're going to be just it's really prioritizing activity and time, right? Because g4 tempo, right? g5 tempo, right? Everything is flowing, everything is moving together to create a harmonious attack, right? That is all aimed at seizing the initiative, gaining time, and gaining a significant linear development. So this bishop f5 variation is great. And I believe that means we've covered everything, right? Bishop f5 I faced a few times as well. I think that I guess to review, right? In c5 the main themes are just sort of recuperating this e4 pawn, and once we recoup this pawn, this extended d5 pawn with the space advantages that we have is especially important when our opponents go for g6. But again, we've seen throughout all of these positions arising from this 1d5 chapter, a lot of times we're sacrificing pawns for activity and growth and development leads. So I think this is a really great illustration. And a lot of the long variations shown aren't exactly meant to be memorized, but meant to be illustrations, and I've said this so many times, illustrations of the dynamic and attacking and developmental initiative, initiative-based play that is rooting from the opening, and that I think is amazing from just a practical level. So thank you guys for watching this chapter and on the move 1d5, and I'm looking forward to the next.